Welcome to Jammin' with Jason Mefford, a show where we discuss topics relevant to Chief Audit Executives and professionals in audit, risk, and compliance. We discuss the technical and soft skills needed to navigate the minefields of organizations. You hear best practices and practical advice for helping you advance your career, and we'll even talk about music, mindfulness, and psychology, because we can. So sit back and relax while you listen to the #1 podcast in the world for internal auditors, unscripted and unedited. Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of Jammin' with Jason. Hey, I am glad and so grateful, actually, that you are choosing to spend the time with me today to go through and spend a few minutes actually learning and improving yourself so that you can be a better auditor. Now, today I want to talk about kind of the theme that I want to talk about is an analogy about elephants and shiny objects. And one of the reasons that I like to use analogies a lot, you'll hear me use a lot of different analogies, is it's a way for us to be able to understand and process some of the different things that we need to do. So when we create a story, when we have a story that has a meaning to it, when we think about an analogy, it makes it easier for us to actually understand and implement those concepts, which can lead to a transformation in us and in the way that we actually do our job. Okay, so today I want to talk about elephants and shiny objects. And I'm going to use that as an analogy to be able to describe and talk about an issue that all of you need to kind of address and think about. And as part of that, I'm going to go through and actually give you some different questions for you to ask yourself so that you can determine, are you dealing with elephants or are you dealing with shiny objects? And I'll get into that and kind of explain what those are in just a minute. Now, before we get started into our actual discussion today, there's a couple of things that I wanted to make you aware of. The first one is I'm starting to record a new series of podcasts. It's going to show up here in the Jamming with Jason. But they're topical, and what the topic is it's lessons from a Chief Audit Executive. So what I'm doing is interviewing Chief Audit Executives so that we can understand kind of the career path on how they became a Chief Audit Executive, lessons that they learned along the way that helped them to become a Chief Audit Executive, and then the lessons from actually being a Chief Audit Executive. Because I know a lot of you that are in internal audit, you kind of think about your career path and you think, oh, someday I want to be a Chief Audit Executive. I know I felt that way, coming out of public accounting and going into corporate life. That's the job that I got, was a Chief Audit Executive to begin with, coming out of public accounting. And so I was really excited. I was stoked about my career, that I'd made that move, but I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. And so one of the purposes of these is to, again, help those of you that are on your career path and want to become a Chief Audit Executive to understand what it takes to get there, but also a little bit more about what the job actually entails. Now, for those of you that are already Chief Audit Executives, these sessions will actually provide and give you a context maybe of some of the things that other Chief Audit Executives are going through or have gone through and what they have been able to do to help make them successful. So, like I said, I've already got the first few interviews scheduled and going to be recording these and releasing these out over the next few weeks or months. And it's going to be one of those that I'm going to, continue to do. So I'll continue to interview Chief Audit Executives. So you'll see those popping up as some of the different episodes, just like you've already seen some in the past when I was talking about to Chief Audit Executives. But usually we were talking about a particular topic. Okay. So the reason that I'm bringing this up is I need to find people to interview, right? So if you are a chief audit executive and would like to contribute and be interviewed on the show, send me a message. You can either email me, send me something through LinkedIn. But also, if you're not a chief audit executive, but maybe you work for someone and you think, wow, this person would do great. They've done some great things. They should be somebody who's actually interviewed and on the podcast as well. Reach out to them, let them know about this opportunity, connect them with me, and we'll get something on the calendar. Because I'm really excited about this session, these upcoming sessions, because I think you're going to be able to learn a lot from the experience of others, and I want to be able to share that with everyone. So again, if you're already a chief audit executive and would like to participate, let me know. And we can go over the details and we'll talk about that and get the recording session done. Or if you know someone else who you think would be a great person to come on the show, then let them know about that as well and connect us together so that we can get that going. So that's kind of the first thing. The second thing is today actually kind of formally announcing that the Chief Audit Executive Forum that I run is actually open for new enrollment. Now, what does that mean, right? The Chief Audit Executive Forum is a group of chief audit executives. So you must be a chief audit executive to participate. But it's a group where we can actually talk about some of the frustrations, challenges, and opportunities of being a chief audit executive, but it's in a confidential environment. So again, you're able to have this community of peers where you can talk about maybe the things that are frustrating or challenging you and get feedback from others in your peer group. Now, this is a confidential environment, so you can feel comfortable actually sharing what's going on and some of the things that you're dealing with and be able to get that help from other people. Now, again, that can be in lots of different ways. It can be, related to, you as an executive leading a team and maybe some of the things that you're dealing with there. It can be, a lot of times we might talk about things related to our relationship with the audit committee and how we can, maybe improve the relationship there, get them to listen to us, because I know sometimes chief audit executives, they feel like they are a trusted advisor, but the executives and maybe the board don't treat you that way, or you're kind of getting ignored and you're not really sure why. Well, this is a forum where we actually go through and talk about that. And, if you're not being invited to the big kid table and you're being excluded, we talk about ways to get included and to be able to provide more value to your organization. Now, it's called the Chief Audit Executive Forum. Some of you may have heard of things like roundtables. And so a lot of different, some IIA chapters or professional service firms run what they call our roundtables. And those are great, but a lot of times, they're a free sort of thing that people volunteer their time, or if it's from a professional service firm, they're really using it as a way to do practice development and try to sell you other things. And that's not what this group is about. This group is about having a community where you can actually feel connected, where you can actually build friendships that will last throughout your career, where you can be open and honest with other people, but it's in a confidential space. Now, this is also something that's different from a lot of those free roundtables that are out there, in that it doesn't require a bunch of your time. A lot of times the free roundtables require a lot of people, either assigning people on your team or you have to do it to try to drive and get things going. That's not what this is for, right? We know that you are an executive, you're busy, and so all of the heavy lifting is actually done by my team. You just need to show up and participate in the group calls or in the group discussions that we have online between the calls. And so there's usually about 10 to 12 different calls during the year where we really get into and discuss, like I said, some of these real challenges, some of the stress and pressure that you might be feeling, and political landmines that you want to make sure that you avoid so that you don't have an issue in your career going forward. Now, for me, when I first became a chief audit executive, I was fairly young. And that meant I was also naive. And so I knew how to audit, but I didn't understand some of the political landmines that were in the organization. And honestly, I made a lot of mistakes. And even as I grew in my career, I continued to experience different things that I never thought or dreamed of that I would actually encounter. And, when I'm coaching chief audit executives, this comes up a lot. I remember one person said, I've had a 30-year career, and I've learned all this in these textbooks, and I've worked for all these companies, but holy smokes, I never learned any of these things in my textbooks or through my experience. And that's just really kind of the reality of what it is. So again, wanted to make sure if you are a chief audit executive and are looking for a community to be able to actually participate with and get that support, not only from me, but from your peers, the open enrollment period is now. It's starting now. And so I'll include in the show notes down below where you can click on the link to be able to go out and fill out your application. Now, there's a couple things that are different about this group. The first one is we only accept new members into the group a couple times a year. So that's why I'm giving you this announcement right now, because in a couple of weeks, it's over and we're not going to accept new members into the group for several more months. So if this is something that you're interested in, you need to act on it now and actually fill out your application. The other thing is, again, it's not a, hey, this sounds really cool, add me to your group. That's not the way this works either. Everybody in the forum actually has to fill out an application. They go through an interview process with me to make sure that they are a good fit for the group. Because again, if we're going to have this confidential community, we have to make sure that only the right people that should be in the group are actually in the group. And so again, there's a process you have to go through. It's not just like raising your hand and saying, hey, add me to your list. That's not what this is. So again, if it sounds like something that you're interested in, go out, look at the information, click on the link below in the show notes, and fill out your application. You have to fill out the application and go through the interview process to see if we'll actually accept you into the group as well. So again, that's out there, and there's more detail on the website that you can go through. If anybody has questions, you can obviously send me a message or an email, and I'll try to answer that as well. But like I said, because this is only open a few times a year, and it's going to close within a couple weeks, so make sure that if this is something that sounds like you're interested in, go check out the website and get signed up, fill out your application and get signed up for your interview. So, okay, so that's are kind of the two things that I really wanted to make sure and get out there today, because those are kind of some time sensitive things. If you want to come onto the podcast and share on the lessons from a CAE series, or if you want to get into the Chief Audit Executive Forum, you need to take action on that pretty quick. So now let's get back into the discussion today. Now, this has kind of come up again from some of the things that I've been seeing as I've been working with chief audit executives and internal audit teams, either through coaching or training. It's also kind of related to some of the stuff that I'm seeing online as well, and some of the things that I'm really hearing. So again, it's about elephants and shiny objects. So let me explain what those two concepts actually kind of mean, and then we'll talk about how that analogy actually relates to you in your internal audit profession, okay? So you might have heard the term before, an elephant in the room, right? And so that term really kind of means that, you know, you're in this room. Imagine that you're just in this room, and there's this huge elephant in the room that everyone is ignoring, okay? Everybody sees it, but everybody's kind of ignoring it because they don't want to admit that there's actually an elephant in the room. And so they usually try to avoid it. It's like a big problem that you need to address, but most people don't want to go there and they don't want to deal with the elephant. Okay, so when you think about the elephant, think about that concept of the elephant in the room. So what's a shiny object? Well, a shiny object could again be something, if you're imagining that you're in the room with this big elephant, there's also some sort of shiny object, something that is reflecting the light. There might be flashing lights on it. It could be something that's metallic in nature, and so the sun is like, glaring off of it. And what ends up happening is we tend to see those shiny objects because they attract our attention. And again, if we don't want to focus on the elephant, we're going to want to focus on the shiny object. So what are some examples of shiny objects? Well, a lot of times you can think about them as those things that are getting maybe a lot of press. There's a lot of articles about it. Everybody's really talking about it. There are these new buzzwords that really, a lot of times a buzzword is just a new term for something that we've been dealing with before. So I'll give you an example of that. A lot of people are talking about RPA, robotic process automation. And that is a buzzword that's out there, right? Because when you actually stop and think about what is robotic process automation, well, yes, it may be some new tools that are out there, but really robotic process automation and how most people are talking about that is no different than we were talking 20 or 30 years ago about how we could use, here's an old term, CATs, computer automated auditing tools. And so some examples of those from the times before, things like IDEA, ACL, right? And again, those are kind of some brand names of these CAT applications. Now, what did they do for you? Robotic process automation, right? You could use them to actually automate audit steps, use that technology to be able to help you in your auditing. So RPA today is being used as this buzzword, and you're hearing it all the time. And most of the time, the people that are talking about it are just trying to get you to buy their software. Okay. And so stop and think about it that way, right? But again, if you have multi-million-dollar marketing budget because you're trying to sell somebody a product, you're going to get that new fancy buzzword out there in front of people all the time. When you step back and look at it, you can go, well, hold it just a minute. This is what we've been doing all along, right? With some of these other tools, but it's maybe a different technology. So maybe there's a new software program that helps you do data analytics better. Okay, great, right? But it doesn't mean that we haven't been doing data analytics before. So that can be an example of a shiny object, right? It's something that you're hearing all the time. It's something that sounds sexy and kind of fun, right? Another example of that is I heard an old term very early in my career called managing by magazine. Okay, managing by magazine. Now, what did that mean? That meant that the CEO of the company happened to be on an airplane and they were reading a magazine. Maybe it was Harvard Business Review. Maybe it was the whatever magazine happened to be in the airline. And they read some magazine article about some new business concept, some new whatever thing. And again, that whatever new thing is probably going to be considered a shiny object. They come back to the organization and they say, we need to start doing this, right? And so they keep changing the strategy or the operations of the organization based on the latest article that they're reading. That's another example of a shiny object. And so again, you can see what people are talking about, what people are thinking is a big deal now. A lot of times those things are actually recycled thoughts from before. Okay, that's just a reality. So again, if you think about concepts like centralization of an organization versus decentralization, Okay. For several, for a certain period of time, everybody says, oh, we have to decentralize. We have to decentralize. We have to decentralize. And so everybody focuses on that shiny object, and they change the organization and decentralize it. Now, what ends up happening is a few years later, somebody comes out and says, no, decentralization is not actually working. We must centralize again. And so all of a sudden, all these organizations that just decentralized now start centralizing. And so again, you can see what's old is new, and history repeats itself. Usually when history repeats itself, somebody tries to assign some fancy word to it, like a buzzword, to be able to get people's attention. And again, usually their motive is to sell you whatever that thing is, right? So if I'm an HR consulting firm and I want to decentralize a centralized company, I'm going to tell you, you must decentralize so I can come in, do that project, decentralize everything. And a few years later, I'm going to say, oh, whoops, decentralization doesn't work as good as we thought it was. So how about if we centralize now? And they go back and they sell the same company now a centralization consulting package where they just helped them decentralize. And so it really doesn't actually make a lot of sense when you stand back and think about it that way. But that tends to be the mentality of a lot of people in organizations. There's a shiny object, there's some flashing thing over there in the corner, and they're drawn to that, and they go over there and they focus all of their attention on that. Now, when you are focused on shiny objects, what are you also doing? You are ignoring the elephant in the room. The elephant is not sexy, but the elephant is huge. And imagine the damage that that elephant could do in the room if they start to go crazy and start, stomping around and swinging their trunk around. There's going to be a lot of damage, or we could use the word impact if we're talking about risk management, to the organization from that elephant. That little shiny object over in the corner is probably not going to have a big impact on the organization. It might be sexy, it might be cool, but it's not going to have nearly the impact that the elephant does. So why am I talking about this, and why am I using this analogy? I see that there are lots of people out there in organizations who are focused on the shiny objects. They're redoing their work to try to go and deal with those shiny objects, and they're ignoring the big impact risks in their organizations. Those things that are like a big gray elephant. They're not sexy, they're not cool, and they look at it and go, well, look, the elephant's just standing there and it's fine anyway. And the CEO's talking about this shiny object, so let's go over there instead. And what I'm here to tell you is, don't ignore the elephant. You ignore that elephant, it's gonna beat up that room. Okay. Now, let me give you some practical advice for you to kind of help you understand. Are you focusing more on shiny objects, or are you focusing more on the elephants? Okay. Excuse me. So here's a couple of questions that you might ask yourself. The first one is, is what we are doing really focused on the strategic objectives of the organization? So again, if you're in an audit department, I want you to kind of look at what's your audit plan for the quarter, for the year, and are the projects and the things that you're doing, are they actually tied back to strategic objectives in the organization? Or are you just doing busy work, right? Are you just auditing payroll again because we audit payroll every year? Or are you looking at what are really the key strategic initiatives in our organization? Because that's really where we should be focused, instead of either something that's mundane, like doing payroll testing again because we do it every year, or some shiny new object, maybe like cybersecurity, because everybody's freaking out about cybersecurity right now. Okay. So that's the first question: is what we are doing focused on the strategic objectives of the organization? Second question: are we focused on an area to try to impress others with what we can do? Ooh, Now, that's a hard question, right? And you really need to be honest with yourself, because are you doing things just to try to impress other people in the organization? Sometimes, again, when I see chief audit executives going after these shiny objects, their goal for doing that is, yes, people are talking about it, but hey, I want to take this sexy project and I want to show everybody in the organization how cool we are and how much value we add. Well, I'll tell you right now, if you're going down that path and that is your primary objective, you're gonna fail, because you're doing something that's fake, and people are going to see a lot of times you're in over your head. And if that particular project doesn't work out, you may be looking for a new job. Okay, that's the reality of it. So again, why are you focused on that particular area? If it's to impress people, you're probably looking at the wrong area. Instead, you should be looking at the areas that are strategic objectives. That was the first question. The third one, what are actually the biggest impact risks to the organization? So again, you've got to be honest with yourself about thinking, what are the elephants to our organization? And like I said, sometimes they're not sexy. But if that really is the thing with the biggest impact to the organization, that's where you need to be focusing your attention. Okay, another one. What forces are going on in the world that could lead to events and impacts in the organization? Now, because in today's business environment, we are so interdependent across the whole world, you really have to be looking at and thinking about more what's going on around the world, because some of these other forces and events that are going on can now have impacts to your organization where maybe 20 years ago they never did. Okay. And so you have to start getting better at looking at and thinking about some of those things. Now, honestly, this is risk management 101. And so I'm going to give you another little analogy here to think about when you're trying to go through that process. When I wear a tie, I usually wear a bow tie. And so again, I want you to picture what a bow tie looks like. It's fat on one end, it goes down to a knot, and then it goes back out to a fat end on the other side. So when you think about the bow tie, you can think about, if you start on the left-hand side of the bow tie, there's a lot of different forces and conditions that are going on in the world that are leading or driving or correlated or causing certain events to happen. Now, when those events happen, they have impacts to your organization. Some of those impacts are going to be good. There'll be opportunities. Other ones are going to be threats, which we then start talking about in the form of risk and how we're going to manage that risk versus the opportunities, how we're going to, operationalize that and take advantage of those things kind of through performance management. So you have to be thinking about that, because again, little events that may happen halfway around the world now actually have an impact on your organization. If you just look at the supply chain for most companies now, I heard the example before of, you take some device like an Apple iPhone, and when you start tearing it apart and thinking about all of the different pieces and parts that go in to make that particular product, those things are actually sourced all over the world. You can go back to the component level. From the components, what did it take to actually create that component? Well, there were probably metals and silicone and all this other stuff. Well, where did that stuff come from? And you start to realize that to get an end product like an iPhone, literally it's probably 30 or 40 places in the world where all of this stuff is coming from. And any little hiccup in that supply chain could cause you a problem, right? So again, what forces are going on in the world that could lead to events that could impact your organization? That's going to help you identify maybe what elephants are already in your room. The last one then is, are you actually auditing based on magazine articles? Okay, so that kind of goes back again to what I talked earlier about with, managing by magazine. Are you putting things on your internal audit plan because you read some article online or in some magazine and somebody somewhere in the world said, oh my gosh, everybody's got to do this, right? If that's what you're doing, you're going about your internal audit plan wrong. You have to think about the things that are actually relevant to your organization and those things that have the biggest impact. Don't do something just because somebody else does it, or somebody with, that you recognize, from the name as an industry expert says something on a webinar, in a magazine article, in something else. Take that information and determine, again, is what they're talking about, is that a shiny object to my organization, or is that an elephant? Now, what I will tell you too is, with my analogy here about elephants and shiny objects, those same events, okay, what is a shiny object to one organization may be an elephant to a different organization. And it goes the other way too. What may be an elephant to one organization may be a shiny object to the other one. So really, you have to start asking some of those questions that I just outlined here to be able to help you figure out, for your organization, are these things shiny objects or are they elephants? And then again, from using that analogy to be able to have you get much more clarity on where you need to be spending your time. And again, I will tell you, as we kind of wrap up here, I know that the elephant in the room is not sexy. It's not exciting necessarily, but that's where we need to be focusing our attention. If you get distracted with the shiny objects, eventually that elephant is going to start running around and kicking, and it's going to severely impact and damage your organization. So that's what I got this week, my friends, and appreciate you hanging out with me. So this week, kind of as a takeaway, go back, if you listen to the episode again, if you need to, write down those questions and, be serious about actually looking at and trying to determine what are the elephants and what are the shiny objects in your organization. Focus your efforts on the elephants. In the long term, that is where you're going to provide more value to your organization than focusing on the shiny objects. So go forth, have a great rest of your week. Ask yourself these questions, and I will catch you on the next episode of Jammin' with Jason. See ya. And that's a wrap. Thanks for listening to today's episode of Jamming with Jason. Keep on rocking in the audit world. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you later on the next show. If you'd like to earn continuing professional education for listening to today's episode, head on over to C-Risk Academy at ondemand.criskacademy.com. And that's C as in the letter C, riskacademy.com. Not only do you get a CPE certificate, but you also will have access to the video version of today's show. The views and opinions expressed on this show are that of the individuals and not of their respective organizations.